said, what we're trying, sir, is to get this compensation to honor the living. Thank you.
Thank you, General. And I understand and I appreciate your comments. I can't imagine what it was like living through that. It was a horror for a lot of people around the world at that time. That I'm sure that the trials and tribulations that the people of Guam went through was repeated not only in the Pacific Islands but also in Europe as well. I'd like to recognize myself for 5 minutes. Okay, all right, I'll do that. I'd like to recognize myself for 5 minutes since you took some issue with some of my comments. Governor, it's my understanding that the Guam leaders have rejected past settlement offers. Where is Guam in regard to these settlement offers and these settlement numbers?
As to a poll? There, you know, again, please recite the question.
It's my understanding that in 1990, there was an offer that was made for approximately $49 million. Mm-hmm. And then that offer was rejected. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that?
You know, I'm not aware of that. I wasn't in public office back in 1990, so I wouldn't be the right one to ask that question. I don't have an answer. What I do know is I go to funerals every week, and every week I see one less person to be compensated because they are in a funeral. So,
well, I would like to make sure that we understand that it's from the research that I've done. It's not as if the government that has said there's been absolutely no money offered to Guam. It's my understanding that Mr. Tamago, would you?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to comment on that?
On the
settlement offer?
The 1990 settlement offer, yes, the report studied that and makes mention of it in our report. And that was some of the members of the commission. When we decided when we came up with our recommendations, we used that as the measure of those living at that time, because we thought it was unfortunate that they did not come to an agreement at the time, and it was unfair to hold that against the people of Guam. So that was simply used as a marker, as so those living at the time should be included in the remedial program.
Well, I guess my concern is that in 1990, there was an offer on the table for $49 million. Here we are some 20 years later. There's a lot of people that have passed away between now and 20 years. And I'm trying to understand why $49 million at the time was not enough. I'm trying to understand where did we come up with this quantity of $100 million?
If your question is, sir, why was the offer not accepted at the time, my information was that the offer was limited to those living at that time, and the community of Guam did not believe that was.
Okay.
I believe that was the issue at the time.
Okay, so it's not as if there haven't been that Congress and the country and this government has been. That there wasn't any offers going out there. I mean, there was money on the table, I think considerable amount of money. And I know my time is almost limited.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to add, though, that there was unanimity in the federal government to do something about the program then.
Right.
The administration at the time, the Congress at the time.
It's a question of money now. Is the amount?
Well, these monies are more symbolic than they are actual.
Well, here's the problem, and this goes on, which leads into my next question. I only got a minute and 15. To the general, and I hope he understands. We're $15 trillion in debt, At the time that the $49 million was offered, we were only $3 trillion in debt. I guess my question, General, if we pass this bill, where would you suggest we take that $100 million from?
Last year, in the Pittsburgh settlement that awarded the blacks, farmers, and the minorities, their agricultural recognition of the agricultural claim, we found $4.2 billion last year. The year before that, we found $198 million for the Filipino scouts. In 1998, we found billions of dollars for the Japanese Americans that were relocated, and was a horrible part of our history, but that was what happened. In 1988, we found money for the Aleutian restitution. And in 1971, we found money for the Micronesian claims.
If you don't mind, General, if I may interrupt, the problem we have here is now we're under a different set of rules. If we're going to award $100 million to one, we've got to cut it somewhere else, because in a lot of the instances that you just explained, there was a lot more money available. In the last 2 years, we've spent $2.5 trillion more than we spent 2 years ago. And so I respect that, and I wasn't here in that Congress. And look, that is why I'm here today asking these questions, is that I'm just trying to find out where we would offset that money from, because we can't just do what past Congresses have done over the last 30 years or so. We can't just add it to the deficits. We've got to go cut it from somewhere else. And I'm sorry that they spent so much money in the last 2 years. They spent an ungodly amount of money. I wasn't here. I want you to understand that. I wasn't a part of that particular spending, but unfortunately, I'm now part of the group that has to make real tough decisions. And so that was all. And I know my time has gone over, so I would like to go ahead and recognize the ranking member, Mr. Bordala, Mr. Sablan. She was looking at me.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Mr. Chairman. I yield my 5 minutes to Ms. Bordala.
Okay, all right, fine, Mrs. Bordala.
Mr. Chairman, I was listening very carefully to your exchange here with General Blas, and if I find an offset, will you then support H.R. 44?
I couldn't commit to that, but what I would tell you is I would be interested in where,
Good.
in where,
Because, this bill has passed the Congress 5 times. It's only the Senate. And I've been told that if I find an offset over there in the Senate, they'll agree. So I'm just asking you, would you agree?
I couldn't commit on that right now, but it certainly would be a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And
With all
right, the chair entered. Yes.
With all due respect, I was reading the newspaper the other day. One of the things as a loyal citizen of the United States, and Congress lady, you see some of the issues just on FAS, what I mentioned, or EITC, what I brought up earlier, and it would be too long to recount all the federal mandates that have really bankrupted our island. But I could recommend. I just saw in the news Pakistan. If they're cutting aid to Pakistan, why don't you offset some of that money with a loyal American territory such as Guam? Little recommendation.
Thank you, Governor. Just for the record, I would like to ask you the same question I asked General Blas. The chair entered a statement from the Heritage Foundation that suggests that whatever war claims are due do not take into account the sacrifice in lives and injuries to liberate Guam. How would you respond to this?
what I understand is I don't think the Heritage Foundation has. I'm wondering if anyone from the Heritage Foundation has ever stepped foot on our island.
Probably not.
You know, when I first came to college out here, when I said I'm from Guam, and it was well-meaning, a lot of folks are saying, "Oh, is that near South America?
Yeah.
Or do you live in huts?" And unfortunately, you know, we are so far away that there is a little understanding of our island.
That is true.
Just myself, my grandfather was first cousin of Father Duenas, so Father Duenas had his head chopped off. My father didn't take off his shoes when he went into a classroom, and the sensei beat him up.
Yeah.
You know, I had another uncle. You know, when you have an uncle whose father was U.S. Marine, what they did with him was they stuck a hose in his mouth and they filled up with water, and when it's filled sufficiently, they put the board on top of him and jump on him. You know, these are things, I don't know if you can quantify it.
No.
But they were all loyal citizens when they were alive, and their children are still also loyal citizens. And this has been 67 years.
Governor, I just want to mention to the chairman, yes, when I came to Congress, you know, this is my 5th term, and when I came to Congress, just to show you how much they know about the territories, that's not just Guam, but all of us. They asked me if Guam was part of Hawaii, one of my colleagues. So, you know, we've got a big job here. We work 3 times as hard as any other member when it comes to explaining our situation and why we're important to our country. Mr. Tamargo, can you explain the Review Commission's finding that there is not a legal obligation for Guam war claims, as one of the statements for the record states, while the Commission reports also states that there is a moral obligation? Could you explain the distinction between...
Certainly, Congresswoman. That war claims, there's never an obligation by a nation to pay, to create a claims program. That is simply a moral obligation. And that's what I was going to explain to the chairman also, that these are war claims given to citizens so that no one citizen has a disproportionate burden in the war. Soldiers have different programs for them, but civilians are given the opportunity to file a war claim if they're so eligible. But Heritage's remarks about soldiers dying on the beaches is I have great respect for the American servicemen, but those are apples and oranges. We're not talking about soldiers. We're talking about civilian population that suffered war damages. And the mission of the commission was to compare the claims program that was given to civilians on Guam and compare it to the civilians given to other U.S. civilians elsewhere in the Pacific. And there's disparity in the comparison, and that's just the facts. So if the facts are that they were not treated fairly, then what would be called for as a moral obligation was to achieve parity. They would need to create a remedial program to give equity to the civilians of Guam. So it's a moral obligation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sablan, would you yield your time to me? Yes, to continue, please.
To continue
Thank
on
you.
your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Vidal for 5 minutes.
Mr. Tamargo, I want some clarifications here because I think our chairman is new to Congress and probably doesn't quite understand all of the situation. But can you explain for the committee the legal rationale for why the United States would pay for Guam war claims and not the government of Japan under this legislation?